It always seems to happen the same way. A child walks into the yard, moving the way children move, a little fast, a little unpredictable, arms doing things arms do not need to do, voice at a volume that belongs indoors, and somewhere in the flock, something shifts. A hen lifts her head. A rooster stops what he was doing and turns, and then the chase begins. The child runs, the chicken runs faster, and what started as a calm afternoon in the backyard becomes a scene of genuine chaos, feathers and screaming, and an adult trying to intervene from across the yard while also trying not to laugh. If you have chickens and children in the same space, you have seen this, and if the child is young enough, the chicken is persistent enough, and the yard is small enough, it stops being funny fairly quickly. A determined rooster is not a trivial thing for a small child to handle. Even a hen, chest-bumping and pecking at small legs, is enough to make a child genuinely afraid, and a child who is afraid of the chickens stops going into the yard, and the relationship between your family and your flock becomes defined by avoidance on one side and aggression on the other. Most people explain it away. He is just protective. She is in a mood. The kids were probably running near the nest boxes. It will sort itself out. It usually does not sort itself out. And the reason it happens in the first place is more specific and more interesting than most people realize. Once you understand what is actually going on from the chicken's perspective, what the child looks like inside the social logic of the flock, what the running triggers, what the silence does not fix, the behavior makes complete sense. And once it makes complete sense, you know exactly where to intervene. Welcome back. Subscribe before you leave, because this one covers something that matters practically for anyone managing chickens and children in the same space, and the explanation goes somewhere most backyard chicken content never bothers to go. To understand why children get chased more than adults, you have to start with how chickens assess every living thing they encounter, because they do not assess things the way we do, and the difference is important. A chicken does not have the luxury of long deliberation. She is a prey animal with multiple active predator threats operating simultaneously, aerial, ground-based, and everything in between, and her survival has always depended on rapid, accurate threat assessment followed by immediate behavioral response. The system she uses to make those assessments is built around a specific set of signals, and those signals are read quickly, continuously, and with very little room for nuance. The primary signals are movement, size, sound, and consistency. A large thing moving slowly and predictably is assessed differently from a small thing moving fast and erratically. A low, steady sound is assessed differently from a high, sudden, variable one. A thing that behaves the same way every time it enters the yard is assessed differently from a thing whose behavior changes unpredictably between visits. Run all of those variables and you get a picture of what an adult looks like to a chicken versus what a child looks like to a chicken. An adult is typically larger, moves more deliberately, uses a lower vocal register, and behaves with relatively consistent patterns day to day. A child is smaller, moves quickly and unpredictably, produces sudden high-pitched sounds, and behaves differently almost every time. From the perspective of a chicken's threat assessment system, an adult reads as a known, low unpredictability entity. A child reads as something else entirely, not necessarily as a predator, but as something that requires monitoring. Something unresolved, something the flock's social and defensive systems have not yet filed neatly into a category. Here is the piece most people do not consider, and it reframes the child-chicken dynamic completely. In a chicken flock, size is one of the primary determinants of social rank. Larger birds dominate smaller birds. This is not universal and absolute. Temperament, age, and individual boldness all play roles, but size is one of the first things a chicken registers about another individual, and it shapes the initial assessment of that individual's social position before any other information is available. A small child and a chicken are not that far apart in relative scale. A large rooster standing next to a 3-year-old is looking at something that is not dramatically bigger than himself. A bold hen looking at a 5-year-old is looking at something she may assess as being within a range she can challenge. This is very different from the calculus involved in approaching an adult, where the size difference is unambiguous and the social math is straightforward. What this means in practice is that children exist in a zone of ambiguity in a chicken's social assessment. They are not big enough to register as automatic authority. They are not small enough to be irrelevant. They sit right in the range where a confident bird might test the boundaries, might attempt a challenge, might run a quick experiment to see whether this particular individual will hold ground or retreat. And here is the critical piece. If the child runs, the experiment has a result. The result is that this individual retreats when challenged. And in the social logic of a flock, an individual who retreats when challenged is an individual of lower rank. A lower-ranking individual is an appropriate target for continued assertion of dominance. The chase was not random aggression, it was a social assessment that produced a conclusion, and the conclusion was that this child is below the bird in the hierarchy. That conclusion will be remembered, and it will be tested again next time. This is the mechanism that most parents and most chicken-keeping guides miss, and it is the most important single thing to understand about chicken-child dynamics. Running away from a chicken does not end the interaction, it escalates it. Every time a child runs from a chicken and the chicken chases, the chase is a reinforcement event from the chicken's perspective. The bird tested, the child retreated. The hierarchy was confirmed. The bird's confidence in its own dominance over this particular individual increases. The next challenge will come faster, from a shorter distance, with less provocation. This is why situations that start with a single incident of a rooster rushing at a child tend to escalate over days and weeks rather than resolving on their own. Every successful chase, successful from the bird's perspective, meaning the child ran, raises the bird's assessment of its own status relative to that child. The child becomes, in the flock's social map, an entity to be dominated rather than respected. And birds who have established dominance over an entity do not stop asserting it. They maintain it, the way they maintain all social rankings, through repeated demonstration. The inverse is also true, and it is the key to the solution. A child who does not run, who holds ground when a chicken approaches, who stands still or moves slowly and deliberately without retreating, produces a different result from that same social experiment. The bird approached. The individual did not retreat. The challenge did not produce submission. The hierarchy is unresolved or, over repeated interactions, begins to resolve in the other direction. This is not about aggression toward the chicken. It is about not providing the signal that confirms a lower rank assessment. Standing still is not passive. It is the active communication of a social position. It is the most important thing a child can learn about being in a space with chickens, and it is almost exactly opposite to the instinct a running, startled chicken triggers in a small child. Everything discussed so far applies to hens and to flock dynamics generally, but roosters require their own section because the behavior of an aggressive rooster toward a child is not the same thing as a hen chasing a child, even though it looks superficially similar. The underlying motivation is different, the potential for harm is meaningfully higher, and the management approach has to be different too. A rooster's primary biological role in the flock is protection. He monitors for threats, calls the flock to cover when danger approaches, positions himself between the flock and anything he has assessed as a potential predator, and when his assessment leads him to conclude that direct confrontation is the right response, he confronts. He has spurs, he knows how to use them, and his threat threshold, his willingness to escalate to physical engagement, is considerably lower than a hen's. The child may move toward hens in ways the rooster reads as threatening. Every single one of these signals pushes toward a protective response rather than away from it. A rooster who chases a child is not, in his own assessment, being aggressive for no reason. He is doing his job. He has identified something he has categorized as a potential threat to his flock, and he is responding to that threat the way he is built to respond. The management question is not how to punish him out of the behavior, but how to either restructure his threat assessment of children over time or restructure the yard to prevent the situations that trigger it. One of the most practical things a child can learn, and one of the things most adults around chickens have picked up intuitively without ever articulating it, is how to read the warning signals that precede a chase, because the chase almost never comes without warning. The warning is just happening in a vocabulary most children do not know yet. A hen who is about to rush at someone will typically show a specific postural sequence first. She lowers her head slightly and extends it forward on a flattened neck. Her pace changes from the loose, variable movement of a foraging bird to something more directed and deliberate. Her eye contact becomes fixed rather than the scanning, one-eyed assessment of a relaxed bird. She may make a low, repetitive vocalization that is distinct from her normal contact calls. A rooster preparing to challenge will often do a short, stiff-legged walk in the challenger's direction, usually from a short distance, with his head held high and his hackle feathers slightly raised. He may drag one wing slightly. He may do a rapid side-to-side head movement. These are the signals that precede the actual rush by several seconds, and several seconds is enough time to respond correctly if you know what you are looking at. Teaching a child to recognize these signals is more useful than teaching them what to do after the chase has started. Catching it at the warning stage, turning to face the bird, standing still, making themselves as large and calm as possible. These responses interrupt the challenge before it becomes a chase and produce better social outcomes with the flock over time. There is a practical, structural dimension to this that is worth covering because sometimes the right answer is not behavioral training, it is spatial management. A child who has to walk past a broody hen's nest box to reach the water faucet is going to have a different experience than a child who can move through the yard without coming within close range of the highest tension spots. A rooster who has line of sight to the entire yard and can see everything a child does will challenge more consistently than a rooster who is focused on the hens near him and does not register the child at the far end of the yard. Dividing the yard so that children have a clear path to do what they need to do without moving through the most socially charged areas of the flock reduces the frequency of confrontation enough that the relationship between children and chickens can develop at a pace that the behavioral training can actually support. If confrontations are happening 3 times every afternoon, the training never gets ahead of the reinforcement of the wrong behavior. If confrontations are happening once every few days, the positive interactions in between can start to build something. Consider where the feed and water are placed. Consider where the rooster tends to range. Consider whether the nest boxes are accessible to children without moving through the main flock area. Small spatial adjustments can make a meaningful difference to the frequency and intensity of chicken-child encounters, while the longer process of familiarity and behavioral training does its work. Here is where I want to leave you, because this reframes the whole picture in a way that is useful. A chicken chasing a child is not evidence of a mean chicken or a poorly raised flock or a child who did something wrong. It is evidence of a mismatch between the child's natural behavior and the social signals that behavior sends in the language a chicken operates in. The child is being a child, unpredictable, fast-moving, loud, inconsistent. The chicken is being a chicken, reading signals, making assessments, testing hierarchies, acting on conclusions. Both are doing exactly what they were built to do. The friction between those two things is not inevitable. It is manageable with an understanding of what is driving it, consistency from the adults supervising the yard, patience with the time it takes to build genuine familiarity, and a child who has been taught enough about chicken social logic to stop running when the instinct says run. That last part is the hardest. Standing still when something is rushing at you requires the overriding of a very deep instinct, and asking a young child to do that is asking something real of them. It is worth asking, and it is worth explaining why, in terms they can understand. The chicken is not chasing you because it hates you. It is chasing you because you ran last time, and running told it something. Stand still, and you start telling it something different. That is a lesson about chickens. It is also, quietly, a lesson about quite a few other things. Tell me in the comments, do you have a story about a child and a chicken in your yard? How did it go? I read every one. See you in the next one.